Welcome to the individual. Welcome to Indiana Disability Justice, presenting parents under oppression, parents with disability and the state. We have collaborated with Indiana Statewide Independent Living Council or Infield. As I said, we are recording. We ask that you mute your microphone until question and answer. We're providing closed captioning and ASL interpreter. Cierra is handling the tech support. Just write your questions in the chat, and we will have questions at the end of the presentation. We have 4 presenters today. Morgan Daly, the Director of Public Policy was until Chasity, who was born with cerebral palsy and is endeavoring to become a positive parent and adapt. And I'm sorry, Morgan has a maroon shirt and she's smiling and her hair is blonde about shouldering. Chasity Stewart has a striped shirt on and her hair is short and brown and she's also smiling. Next, we have Ray Montgomery, who has a suit and tie on and has really short black hair. He lost his vision at the age of 17 and is a father and an active community member. The last presenter is Birdie. She has on a gray sweater with a orange or pink shirt under it. She has her hair pulled back and a chicken next to her. Birdie is a former foster parent whose medical disabilities occurred later in life, and she is struggling to foster again. The 2 IDK staff that are working on this Sierra Olivia Thomas Williams is a master MA and the prevention for Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence and the co-founder of IDK. Next is me. Sorry. She was wearing a black sleeveless tank and he had her hair pulled back and is smiling. My picture, I have a red flannel shirt on and my hair pulled back, and I'm cuddling with my black lab. I am a part of the IDK leadership and I have cerebral palsy. And now we were doing the Morgan for common crime, history, and discrimination.
Thanks, Jen. I am gonna share my screen really quickly to make sure you can all see this. Can everybody see what's on my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hold on, that put me into a weird view. Let me try to share that in a different way really quickly. One second, guys. Sorry for the tech issues. I may have to share it like this so that I can still have my notes pulled up. All right, is it okay viewing it this way? I can probably actually make it a little larger. Does that help?
I can see it well, yeah.
Okay. If anybody isn't able to access that, please let me know. So hi, thank you all for having me. I'll do another brief introduction, mostly because I do not look the same way that I look in that picture anymore. My name is Morgan Daly. I'm the Director of Public Policy with the Indiana Statewide Independent Living Council. That's the long term for INSILC. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am a person with multiple invisible disabilities, one of which causes me to talk very quickly. So I do try to use the captions to make sure the captioner and the ASL interpreters can keep up with me, and also to remind myself to slow down. But if you're having trouble understanding me or I start speaking too fast, please feel free to interrupt me. Either yell at me in the chat or unmute yourself and tell me to slow down. Just for a brief visual description, so I am a middle-aged white female with long dark hair. I have big glasses that magnify my eyes, and today I'm sitting in my home office with a bookshelf on one side of me behind me and a window on the other. I also have a gray fat cat that may pop on from time to time. I also have to give the disclaimer that I am an attorney, but nothing in today's presentation should be considered legal advice. It's just good information and conversation to have as a community. I'll also give you a brief visual description of our slides as we go along, and I'll make sure that I try to read those all out loud. So this slide says disability discrimination in parenting. In white, it's on a blue background with a green outline of the state of Indiana. And on the bottom left side, it has the INSILC logo and the name Indiana Statewide Independent Living Council. And then we have black boxes on the bottom of our screens. And I guess I'll share because folks found this interesting earlier. Those are there so you can drag your live captioning into that area and it won't cover up the screen for you. Just a little heads up on why those black boxes are there if those are new for you. I'll talk a little bit about INSILC. So INSILC's mission, which is what this slide says, is to empower our peers with disabilities to lead and control their own lives. We are a federally mandated statewide independent living council. We're a 501c3. We are governor appointed, our board is, but we are independent and autonomous from the state. What's cool about our organization that is different from a lot of other disability organizations is that our staff is 100% people with disabilities. And our board or council is actually federally mandated to be at least 51% of people with disabilities or more. I think we're at about over 80% right now. And the reason that is because it's really important for the disability rights and disability justice movement to be led by us, people with disabilities. Happy to have allies, but like any movement, it should be run by the folks that are impacted by it. Trying to get to my next slide. Sorry, guys. Oh, there we go. So this slide is bright green on the background with a pink thing on the side, and it says in capital letters, we have the power to think, speak, and decide for ourselves. And this is important for a lot of things, but in the context of today, since the beginning of disability rights, we've seen educators and landlords, businesses, and healthcare providers get trained on what disability rights are through a lens of how not to get sued. But very little attention is given to our peers with disabilities and training us on what our rights are, how to be empowered, and then how to advocate for ourselves. And so today, I think it's really wonderful that you'll be hearing primarily from parents and prospective parents who are experts in this space because they have lived experience in disability. I am not a parent. And so I will try to take up as little time as possible. I've limited myself so that you can actually hear from the experts and learn about empowerment and reasonable accommodations in parenting. This slide says why. In capital letters with a question mark, it's white text on a bright green background. And so why are we talking about disability discrimination in parenting? And because as you will learn in the next few slides, it's happening at really unacceptable rates here in Indiana, but across the country. And there are ways that folks can get engaged in systemic advocacy and training of our peers with disabilities to help combat this. So we're hopeful that we can share a little bit about the problem. You can hear about folks who are working to fix it in their own lives and systemically, and then help give you tools and resources to do so as well. I also want to give a content warning. So if you are a parent with a disability, a person with a disability, a child of a parent with a disability, or are someone without a disability, someone who is multiply marginalized, who has had to deal with the state coming in and trying to remove children from your home or not being able to foster or adopt due to discrimination. Some of the information we're going to talk to could be very emotionally triggering, and I want to make sure that everybody has the space to take care of themselves, to walk away if they need to. No one will be offended. Your personal health and mental health care is the most important here. Okay, so this is a agenda slide that just gives the topics of what I'll talk about next. It is green with white text and says, first, we'll talk about parents with disabilities. Second, we will talk about disability discrimination in parenting. Third, we'll talk about systemic barriers. And fourth, we'll talk about ableism. So this next slide is titled, let me see if I can get it to move. Oh, there we go. Parents with disabilities. So I'm going to read some statistics, and these statistics have citations underneath them, which I'm not going to read. But if it's not accessible for you and you want access to these citations, please feel free to ask in the chat, contact me or Jennifer and Cierra, and we will get those to you. And so first, it's important to know how many parents we have with disabilities to know how many people are being impacted by this problem. So more of our peers with disabilities are becoming parents. We know that 5 to 10% of parents identify as having a disability, and 19% of children in the US foster care system have a parent with a disability. That statistic should shock you, right? That 19% of folks that are in our foster care system have a parent with a disability. And when we talk about discrimination on the next slide, I think you'll see why. So the second slide is titled Disability Discrimination in Parenting. And this is statistics on how many folks who are parents with disabilities are experiencing discrimination or how likely they are to. So disabled parents have a 22% higher odds of the parental rights being terminated. And parents with psychiatric disabilities are 8 times more likely to have the child welfare system involved and 26 times more likely to have their child placed outside of their home. I think both of those statistics are really disturbing, and I would be remiss if I also didn't say that that doesn't include discrimination on multiple layers, right? So our peers with disabilities are Black and brown. They don't always necessarily speak English. They may have other multiple marginalizations, be it folks who are Indigenous, but they're going to experience discrimination in that space too. And so while these statistics are terrible, they are even worse for our peers with disabilities who are multiply marginalized. All right, so I'm going to go to the next slide and chat about systemic barriers. So I'm going to read this slide first and then talk a little bit about it. So we have state laws that include being disabled, in air quotes, as a reason for termination of parental rights, inaccurate information on the application of the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, within the child welfare system. Folks lack access to affordable legal representation, and there is a lack of education and awareness among courts and judges. So I'm going to go to the first one because I think this shocks a lot of people. The idea that being disabled could be a reason under the law for terminating parental rights. And I know you probably think that can't be possible. That's discriminatory, just outright. But unfortunately, in many states, this is one of the contributing factors or a deciding factor that can be used to terminate parental rights. For those of you who are in Indiana, that is accurate and current law in the state of Indiana. Inaccurate information on the application of the ADA looks like a lot of things, right? So if things are physically accessible, in the parenting space, we see that child welfare system staff don't know anything about reasonable accommodations. They don't know much about disability rights. If someone asks for an accommodation, most folks don't even know where to start. And that's a big problem, right? Because if the staff you're asking to help you get an accommodation so your child isn't removed from your home doesn't know, you're going to run into a lot of barriers. There's also a lack of access to affordable legal representation. So we all know, just blanket statement, that hiring an attorney is very expensive. That doesn't account for the fact that 25% of our peers with disabilities live in poverty, and the current unemployment rate of our peers with disabilities is 12.6%. For reference, in comparison to our non-disabled peers, the unemployment rate is under 5%, right? So that's more than double. So asking parents with disabilities who are already getting pulled through a discriminatory system to get access to legal help is a really difficult thing to do. People also say sometimes, well, there's legal aid clinics. Sure, there are, but they are stretched thin and they don't often do family law cases, right? And so being able to actually get access to a legal aid clinic to help with a discrimination claim and parenting is pretty difficult to do. There's also, and I will talk about this one quickly because I get very frustrated, a lack of education and awareness among courts and judges. I could share many stories with you, but the most frustrating is a parent had their child removed from their home by the court simply because they were blind. There was no other reason. Thankfully, that case got appealed and the child got to go home back to the parent who was blind. But the amount of emotional labor that put on that parent and that child and the strain it put on that family just isn't acceptable. And that's really just one example. This happens all the time. All right, now we're going to talk about my favorite or least favorite topic. And then I will shut up and let our parents talk about their lived experience. But we'll talk about ableism. This is a white slide with a green bar on the left side. The text is in blue. And I'll define it for you first. So ableism is a system of prejudice and discrimination that devalues and excludes people with disabilities. There is a citation there as well. What's interesting is ableism is one of these isms, right? Sexism, racism, capitalism. But for whatever reason, ableism isn't talked about very often, and it's very prevalent in our everyday lives. There are 4 levels of ableism folks talk about regularly. Those are internalized, interpersonal, institutional, and structural. And so when you're talking about structural and institutional ableism, you're really talking about physical barriers, policies, laws, regulations, and practices that are excluding our peers with disabilities from equitable opportunities. We see it in lack of accessibility in public spaces. We see it in the inability or the unwillingness for people to provide accommodations in schools or in the workplace. It's really these outside systems that are impacting our peers with disabilities on a daily basis. When we talk about internalized and interpersonal ableism, this one's really hard for me because I've experienced it a lot myself. It's really taking all of these systemic things that are being thrown at you as a person with a disability and feeling like you are lesser or you are inferior, and maybe those people are right. And so in parenting, sometimes this manifests in, well, asking, am I really a good parent? Does my disability make me a bad parent? And we all know this isn't true. And if you sat down and talked to those folks, you would probably get to an endpoint where they know they're a great parent and their disability is often an asset or a plus to their parenting, but it's still hard because there's so much external ableism that it gets internalized sometimes too. I am checking the chat just to make sure someone's not yelling at me to slow down, which is probably the case. Oh, Amber shared there is also lateral ableism both inside and outside of systems. Yes. There's also what's called microaggressions, but for the sake of time, because I need to turn it over to other folks, I won't go into that. But if you are bored or want to learn more about ableism, check out microaggressions as well, because those are very prevalent in our everyday system. All right, I think that is all for me right now. So I will stop sharing and turn it over to our parents and prospective parents, unless anyone has questions on this set.
Thank you, Morgan. Now we will go to the panelists and question and answer. And the panelists can introduce themselves further if they want to. So the first question I have is, can you give an example of discrimination you have experienced?
Sorry to interrupt, Jen. This is Morgan. I think Tatiana has their hand raised, and I just wanted to check and make sure we got a question answered if there was one before we moved on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was Jennifer asking a question as well, or?
No.
Oh, okay. So my question is, hi, I'm Tatiana Alvarez, and I'm with the Indiana Department of Child Services, and I do international and cultural affairs. And we are integrating, of course, they ask questions about, other cultures, and I do language access, but I'm wanting to learn more about the world of disability because we have exactly everything Morgan is saying happening, and it's lack of understanding sometimes more so than a real case of abuse or neglect. So my question is, all of this is new to me, so I apologize. Ableism, how do you pronounce it? Ableism? I don't know how to pronounce.
Ableism, yeah, you're right.
Ableism, is that just for discrimination? And what determines what would be would it be the same in one country or another, in one state or another? Would they include the same? I mean, is that just for disabilities? Would it include the same disabilities, or would it be considered different? Because I work a lot with Hispanics and other cultures, so what they might consider disability might be totally different than what we consider it in the US. I don't know if I'm making myself clear with my question, sorry.
That's okay, it's a good question. This is Morgan. So ableism is definitely can be discrimination, right? But it also exists outside of discrimination. some good example of that, or if you see like commercials where people with disabilities are doing normal things, and people are like, yay, look at that great person with a disability, right? That comes off in an ableist approach because it makes the person with the disability seem like a superhero for really just doing normal things. So the first part of your question is ableism can be discrimination, but it also just exists all over the place, and it's written into our laws and the way people behave towards each other. The question about how people define disability different culturally is also really great. And so I think if someone identifies as having a disability or maybe a condition of aging, if they're experiencing something that feels like ableism, regardless of how it's defined and under what country, that would still be considered ableism. I hope that's helpful. I can follow up with you and send you some cool resources, Tatiana, just about ableism generally.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'd love that. Thank you. And I appreciate the answer. Thanks. Sorry, Lisa, interpreter, I'm speaking too quickly.
Okay, let's go to question and answer. The first question is, can you give an example of discrimination you have experienced as a parent or foster mother or father? Chastity, do you want to answer it? You're muted.
So sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Chasity Jewett, and I am a prospective foster parent. I have what they call spastic diplegia cerebral palsy. I was born at 27 weeks, I think, maybe even 26. And when I was 4 hours old, I passed away for over 8 minutes. They considered me clinically dead. And I came back to life, which obviously being gone those 8 minutes caused brain damage. And so cerebral palsy is the result. I was officially diagnosed at 9 months old, and I was told that I would never walk or talk or function in society. My parents, when I was a new baby, they tried to get my mom to put me in an institution, and she just wouldn't do any of that. So I'm college educated. I have a degree in early childhood education, but I'm currently a substitute teacher because working in early childhood education got too hard on my body. So I switched to doing this, and I work in all grades. I love what I do. I work as the teacher for the entire class, and also as what they call what do they call that? An educational assistant. I'm sorry, I couldn't think of the name of it. So I work one-on-one with special needs in the classroom as well. So I kind of get a taste of everything. But anyway, the question that you had asked, yes, I am in the process of becoming a foster parent. And when I first started, I went through classes just fine like everyone else and did this and that. And then the question came up about me being able to do CPR with a dummy on the floor. And I did try to do that. And I've done it in the past. But as I age, it's getting harder for me to get on the floor in such a way. So when I did go to class and do it once, I failed that portion. I did pass the infant and child portion because their bodies are smaller and such, but I had to be able to do the full bodied or the dummy the way they do it. And I tried to do it and I fell over on the floor, and there were even people in the room laughing at me. And then I went back to my agency and said, this is what happened. So I did get certified for part of it, but the lady legally could not certify me for the rest because I didn't perform it. So my agency was like, you're not going to be able to continue this journey with getting your license. The state is not going to let you. And I said, when it came down to it, basically what's happened was I'm the first person in the South. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, my earpiece did something funny, but I'm the first person in where I live in South Bend, Indiana, to have a more severe disability that will ever foster. My agency, the South Bend chapter, has been here since 1987, and no one with a more severe disability, as they would call me maybe, has ever asked to foster. So I already broke through one barrier in doing that, but I also found someone when they said that Indiana wouldn't let me. This is Indiana, by the way, this is not my agency. They said that Indiana wouldn't let me do that. I found a lady who would allow me to do an adaptation. And she got a hold of my agency and said she was in and out of my space in 5 minutes. There's no way I'm not going to certify her in CPR. What I did was I came up with my own solution in that I took a forearm crutch over my walker. And the lady said the difference between normal CPR and what I had to do was for me just to keep the compressions going until I could lead someone else into doing it, or the EMT show up. And she actually didn't think that I had the strength to do that. And she said that she was pleasantly surprised and reminded me that I would be just fine and that it's okay to have broken ribs because it's better to have broken ribs than a dead body. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chasity. How about you, Birdie?
Hi, my name is Birdie Black, and I'm a former foster parent. I would say that my LCPA, Licensed Child Placement Agency, during our first 3 home studies, the licensing specialist had found no problem. She knew that I was medically disabled. All my medical supplies, because I have a home health nurse that comes and accesses my port, all of that stuff was in place. But when we took our first placement, we got a brand new hire, family case manager from the LCPA, and she came in and saw my medical supplies and immediately went back to her office and expressed her concern with my medical clutter, as she stated, which nothing had changed since our home stays and us getting licensed. But then flash forward to where retaliation for me asserting my rights. Our foster license got revoked, and I fought that. And she actually testified in court that she didn't think that me being disabled that I would make a good foster parent, and the judge herself actually told DCS attorney that you needed, because she kept volunteering her personal assumptions and ableism ideology, but the judge actually told the DSS attorney, you need to tell her to stop, only answer the questions that I'm asking. I will also say that the child that we had severe medical needs, was globally delayed, was in speech therapy. And one of the reasons why we took him as a placement from some friends of ours was because they encouraged him learning sign language, and that our friend had no interest in doing that, didn't know sign language at all. And she figured that with my knowledge being part of the deaf and hard of hearing community, that I could teach him sign language, which I did. He was able to communicate his needs and so forth. But one of the experiences that I had from DCS and the CASA in the county that he was at, they stated that they told me not to teach him the sign to call me mommy, and that they testified that they that they told me that it was okay to teach him how to call me foster mommy. Now this child was globally delayed and had to do a modified sign language anyway, and they couldn't even tell you culturally what the sign for foster mommy was, which if I being a fake mommy, that's insulting culturally to me. So to fingerspell foster mommy, he wouldn't have been able to even done that. So that came out in our testimony as well, that they never said that, and that it was a lie. But they continuously annihilated me. The CASA testified that there was a time, the one and only time she actually paid a visit to my home, she rode shotgun with the DCS family case manager. And she actually submitted her court report that she told me hello walking into my house, which I doubt that she did, but she testified that she told me hello as she was walking in my house, and that I was belligerent and ignored her. Now, at that point, she walked through on my right side, which that's my worst side, and I did not have a hearing aid at that time. So had she truly said that, I wouldn't have heard her, but she used that against me as saying that I was rude and belligerent and didn't acknowledge her presence. But you know, she came into my house with the sourpuss face anyway. So I experienced a lot of retaliation trying to assert my rights, even under the Foster Parent Bill of Rights, where they're supposed to respect your schedule and the child's schedule. It was known to our LCPA that I was attending ASL certification classes at the NES School for the Deaf on Mondays, and on campus, you're not supposed to use your voice. They weren't respecting my time. The LCPA constantly called for meetings at the time that I was supposed to be on campus, and then would call, and to where I would have to take their phone calls, and they wouldn't respect my schedule, let alone the child's schedule. So yeah.
Thank you, Birdie. How about you, Ray?
All right. Hey, how's everybody doing? My name's Ray Montgomery. Yeah, I'm totally blind. I got 3 growing young men right now that that I take care of. Well, me and my wife take care of. But yeah, discrimination comes in all shapes and sizes, I believe, and I haven't experienced discrimination on the level that our foster parents have. But dealing with the school system, I would say, just really trying to make sure that you get the appropriate materials in an accessible manner is very key. And sometimes discrimination comes in unseen things, like people will, talk to the person that you come with. So if I come into the meeting, say I'm with my sighted guide, they may talk to that individual instead of talking to me. So that's where you have to know, first of all, you have to be assertive. You have to let them know that, they're not here for this situation. They need to direct all their questions and concerns to you, because that's just another form of discrimination. That's just another way of that they're belittling you right there in front of your children. So those things do happen a lot. But as far as with just being a parent and being discriminated against, those are the things that happen. People always want you to sit down. People always don't include you. And that's another form of discrimination as well, that they don't think that you're able to contribute, maybe even to the conversation, because of their misperceptions, their stereotypes, and them just not knowing what an individual who is blind or have another disability is capable of doing, because of the negative perceptions and the ableism that goes on in our society right now. So discrimination comes in all shapes and sizes, and just really, I can't, it's just really very frustrating at the end of the day, because you always have to pick and choose your battles. And there's some battles that, you have to let you let go, but some battles you have to fight, because how the next person behind you is going to have to interact with this individual. So you have to sometimes stand up and make it better for the next person coming behind you. And that's really what I try to do when I face these type of discriminations, especially within the school system. I have to really talk to the instructors, get a relationship with these individuals, the teachers, and let them know that I have a computer that talks to me. So if you send me any materials that they're doing in class, if you send it via email, I'm going to be able to access that information. If you send it to me in print, it's going to be a few challenges, but I can get it done with the scanning and other accessible technology out there. But as far as discrimination, you just have to make sure that you're talking to that individual and letting them know that you are more than capable of taking care of this child, making sure him or her is able to get on the bus, be dressed appropriately, get their work done, and have their manners. And just really just showing them by actions is just all I do. So.
Thank you, Ray. On that question, and we kind of touched on it, is what are reasonable accommodations and why are they so important? Birdie, do you want to answer?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to
one-
interrupt. This
yeah.
Lisa, the captioner, can I please get permission to caption again? I had technical difficulties.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. I will do that right now.
One reasonable accommodation that I asked for, I didn't say it under the guise of a reasonable accommodation, but I wasn't able to speak during one of our meetings at our home where the DCS representative and our agency representative was there. And I had asked, I wasn't able to speak. They clearly didn't know how to sign. So I just asked for them to communicate on pen and paper. And when they came in, the DCS representative asked, well, where can we all sit? And all I did was point to my kitchen table where we could all sit down. And she raised such a fit. She's like, I don't understand what you're saying. I'm like, all I did was point to the table, but it was just, she wasn't accommodating at all. I asked for them to respect the time that I was at the campus for ISD. That didn't get respected. There is a law where under DCS law that the child's schedule should be respected. He had multiple therapies. He had 2 vision therapies, speech therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy. So his actual therapy schedule wasn't respected. And as far as like visitation schedule, which I understand visitation is important, but when the mother's not employed, I would think that the child's therapy schedule, especially since he was so globally delayed, should have came as a priority. One thing that it's somewhat off topic, but it is a reasonable accommodation. The child himself was low vision, and since he was globally delayed, he could not sweep for objects. So he was actually given a weighted down miniature shopping cart. One thing that DCS and the CASA said is that I didn't respect the visitation facilitator, which my issue is that when we loaded the child up with the visitation facilitator, the shopping cart got put in the trunk. This is something that the child needed to visually to catch anything from bumping into stuff. The visitation facilitator, when he brought him back, said he didn't even take it out of the trunk. I'm like, what do you mean you didn't even take it out of the trunk? He needs this visually to catch anything that's in his way. It's like, so me requesting them to provide him with his vision tools was was unreasonable. I was just, and actually because the visitation facilitator was of Indian descent, they actually said that I was being racist towards the visitation facilitator, which was absolutely false. So yeah.
Thank you, Birdie. Ray, would you like to expand on that?
Definitely. Reasonable accommodations are really small, minor, or sometimes big modifications that allow an individual with various disabilities to do their job successfully as someone that does not have a disability. So for me, as a person who was blind, my reasonable accommodation would be, like I talked about the teachers, it would be for them to actually provide me with information in an accessible format. So that would be electronic format. Everything right now is on the computer. So I don't believe that it should be that difficult for you to actually send me a copy of anything that you have already stored on your hard drive. So that is a reasonable accommodation. Even with my job, I need a screen reader. So I use a program called JAWS, which converts that text to speech. So I'm able to jump on these Zoom meetings. I'm able to do my Microsoft applications, Word, PowerPoint, Excel. I'm able to do my Amazon shopping. Right now it's Christmas, so I got to do a lot of that. So reasonable accommodations are really sometimes small things, as well as me putting the bump on my microwave, or the job putting a little, a bump on the microwave so I can access, the stop and start button, and I'm able to be independent while I'm at work. Small things to big things. Reasonable accommodations do not cost as much. Some reasonable accommodations, they say, can cost as little as $400. I mean, but these accommodations make it so that an individual such as myself or another individual with a disability can perform their job or these tasks successfully and with minimum help. So those reasonable accommodations come in very handy. So,
Thank you, Ray. Chasity, what do you have to say?
Okay, so I'm not totally sure how this is gonna go because I'm not fostering yet, but one of my biggest issues with accommodations and such is that I cannot drive. But I know lots of ways of getting around. Just to give you an example, I work at 6 different schools, and I picked the 6 closest to my home because when I go to work, I use Uber and Lyft. I do have a handicap bus situation in my city, but I do not sub where I live. So it's just a little bit over in a place called Mishawaka from where I am. But if I work at my favorite school, I work mostly 4 days a week. If I work there 4 days a week and give $1 tip each way, so you add up those 4 days, I'm spending $500 a month. And so when my agency says that we don't take kids to parent visit, I want to believe them, but I'll believe it when I see it. But that'll be good for me because that means they'll be bringing a transporter. And my hope is that when they have basic appointments where I don't need to go, I want to be there for the important things. But if I don't need to go, if it's just some routine, I don't know, something, then I'm hoping that a transporter will come and get them. But again, I'm planning for that not to be the case because I don't trust when people say things like that. Because I hear from other foster parents that that's not the case or whatever it is. But so I try to plan ahead. So that's my biggest thing is trying to save as much money as possible, if that makes sense. But I'm also trying my hardest to get out of some debt that should be happening in the next couple of years. And so when that happens, that'll free me up. But it's amazing to me how much this stuff adds up when I don't get to use the handicap bus, which is a set rate. But even that needs work because you can only take that bus. I can't just decide one day I want to get on it. I have to give them 48-hour notice, and it is cheaper. It's a set $2 rate one way, but they don't always go where we need to go. So anytime anyone is willing to take me and my kids or my kids to where they need to go, I will take them up on that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is related.
Jen?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I did want to bring into the room a comment from the chat by Amber O'Haver.
Oh, yeah.
She is saying, related to this question of reasonable accommodations, that we should presume competence, presume capability, because we do this for non-disabled parents, and we need to do the same for parents with disabilities. The need or use of reasonable accommodations does not negate competence or capability, nor does it justify rude and disrespectful behavior and actions from any individual providing case coordination or case management. So thank you, Amber.
That is awesome. And I think all of us appreciate that comment. Thank you. Related to reasonable accommodation, what is self-advocacy and how is it related to reasonable accommodation? What do you think, Ray?
I would say self-advocacy is really being able to advocate for yourself, knowing your rights, knowing about the ADA, knowing what discrimination looks like at the end of the day. Self-advocacy is really being able to speak for yourself, being able to articulate and mean what you say. And those two things with reasonable accommodations, I would say you have to be able to advocate for yourself. You have to know what accommodations are needed and what is reasonable, because some people may not think you may not need that bump on the microwave, but that small dot for me makes a world of difference in order for me to, heat up my lunch or, things of that nature. And, self-advocacy really goes hand in hand with that. Reasonable accommodations make it possible for me to be a positive role model for my children, be a productive citizen. It allows me to be independent as much as possible. Allows me not to depend on individuals for minor tasks. So it really frees me up and allows my children to see me in a whole different light. And they know that the individuals such as myself who was blind or other individuals with various disabilities who I introduce them to know that they are more than capable of doing, everyday tasks, and especially being a parent. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to sometimes be assertive. And I know at times I wasn't assertive because I didn't know, about the rights and things while I was going to college and things like that. So I was really on my own back when I was attending college. I was learning as I go, and I was learning that I was being discriminated against. So I had to really advocate for myself. It wasn't nobody out there holding my hand saying, oh, Ray, you need extra time, you need this, that, and the third. It was things that I was learning as I went through, and individuals that I met along my journey who inspired me, and say, no, you got to speak up. You can't just really let individuals walk over you, because I learned if you let them walk over you, they will continue to walk over you. So being an advocate is really something you have to do for yourself. You have to just really know your rights. Once again, picking those battles that will make it better for the individuals coming up behind you. So those two things kind of go hand in hand with me.
Thank you, Ray. How about you, Chasity? You're muted.
Okay. So for me, Personally, my parents had me making my first medical operation decisions for myself at age 14. And I kept saying, Mom, why? And I'm like, this is eye surgery. I said, they're going to take my eyes out of my head, rest them on my face, and do surgery and to the muscles in the back. I said, this is something you should be doing. You're the parent. She said, I'm not going to be here forever. You need to do this now. And so that set me on a course to advocating for myself. There is an exit interview so like the kids I serve now, I also needed what they call a paraprofessional to help me with some things in school. And when you graduate from high school, you do an exit interview. And I was going off to college. Well, I asked permission to control that meeting. I invited the people that needed to be invited, and I needed to get things done because the college that I went to, they didn't even have like physical accommodations for me. I had to ask for them, and they went through and they put in all these ramps and did all these things. And luckily, right before I graduated, like this is May of 1999, they had me do a tour and said, is this good enough for you? Is this good enough for you? And it was wonderful. And then every building that I saw built after that was, of course, ADA compliant. And so I feel like my mom set me up then to be where I am today. And that's my job as a foster parent. I believe these are the things. My job is to help them through their traumas. My job is to help them rise above them. And if they can't, then my job is to help them cope with them. Because trauma, it can be lifelong. And sometimes no matter what you do, it's just there. So then it would be for me to teach them how to cope with them and to speak up for themselves, to know that they are loved and secure here where they are, and to teach them about money. Those are the things that I'm supposed to do to make sure that they grow to be the best people that they can be. And getting ready to foster, having my own disability, I'm sort of, and I'm sure Birdie can relate to this, we've sort of got a mark on our back, and Ray too. We've got a mark on our back. So the parents are going to see me and they're going to maybe talk garbage because they're hurting. But it's how I choose to respond that matters, because the kids are watching. The kids are going to do what they see me doing. And so if I can teach them that we all have a voice and how to stand up for themselves and to ask for what you need, then everybody wins. So that's the way I look at it.
Thank you. Okay, Birdie, you're up.
I don't have any problem self-advocating for myself, and that's basically what I was doing the whole time that I was a foster parent, but it backfired on me. Anytime I tried to assert my rights because I knew them, I was looked at as being difficult for trying to request that they respect my rights. Even I will say, even when our license was revoked, fighting it was a bit of a joke, because DCS says that they don't discriminate, but they do. The LCPA discriminated, the CASA discriminated, and it just took one piece of that case management team to discriminate against me, and it just kind of overflowed into every other aspect. They didn't trust that I would know best how the child, just going back to his vision. There was a time where I was called to the courthouse in this county for a team meeting, and someone else was going to watch over the child. And then I was actually told to stop worrying about the child while we're at the meeting, which was fine. But I was present for all the vision therapies and all the other therapies to know how limited his vision was. And I knew that the person that they had to babysit the child wasn't aware of how limited his vision was, and they weren't valuing my input. And so, of course, while we're at our meeting, he walks right into a door jam and is bawling his eyes out. And of course, I scoop him up, and then he's so emotionally upset over his injury. He says vomits everywhere. But I was told that I was just being paranoid. My input wasn't valued. It was just the whole situation was just horrible. But yeah, I have no problem. Self-advocacy, not a problem. I'm tired of being walked over. And like Ray says, if you allow them to walk over you, they're going to keep walking all over you. And I had no problem standing up for myself, which they did not like.
Thank you. We heard a lot about your struggles, but can you guys share a success story with us? And I think we're gonna go to Chasity.
Okay. Well, I feel like I have lots of them, and sometimes it just takes having to write them down in a book or something to remind me that, like, this is how far you've come. And when you're tired enough, because we all have to pick our battles, all three of us. Like, it's exhausting, like hearing people's garbage all the time. And so for me, I just try to hold on to all the victories and if they're really big, like this whole CPR thing, to me, that was monumental. And so I wrote that down. So when I'm having a boohoo, whatever, I can be like, oh, I remember this. So I can look back in the book. But I feel like one thing for me, so I'm a substitute teacher, and they have what they call a universal substitute, which means that I don't pick where like I pick the schools and the jobs that I want. But when you're a universal substitute for one school, that means you're there and you're wherever they put you. And that's a 5-day-a-week job. And I can't do that. And I had this principal who went and behind my back, I had no idea, talked to the school system, talked to someone and said, look, she comes running. She'll come on days when she's not working and be a few minutes late and come in an Uber because I called her at 6:45 and said, can you be here? And she's never once said no to me. And I can tell she loves what she does. And he convinced them to give me 2 of those 5 days a week on contract as his universal substitute. And I'm just grateful all the time. Whenever this guy is just encouraging to me, I'm just saying thank you, because I've never had a boss that has done that before. When I told him, think good thoughts for me, I'm doing this webinar thing, I've never done anything like this, and his response was just go get him. And so I feel like it's a victory for me to have someone that's willing to pull apart a 5-day-a-week job just so I can be there. And that is one of my favorite schools. And so I'm just grateful. This guy will know it until he retires, and hopefully after that, because I'm always going to tell him.
That's awesome. Let's see. Let's go with Ray.
All right, cool. Success, I would say one of my biggest successes is really being an inspiration for my 3 young sons right now, and them not really seeing me as a person who was blind or visually impaired, and really raising them to be more kind, putting them in positions where they can meet people with various disabilities, and seeing people that from all walks of life, I would say, is really my big success, because I want them and also their friends to understand that, just because I went blind, I'm I'm not just sitting around the house and, wallowing in my own pity. So I just really want them to see, that if something happens, there's life after. You can still live a successful life. You can still go to work every day. You can still buy a house. I mean, I've done things that I never thought I would be able to do after I lost my sight. So, and my 3 sons, they keep me inspired and really keep me motivated to keep moving on. So really them, seeing me and being inspired by what I do, and then wanting me to come speak, at their schools and, talk to their friends. That really encourages me and, keeps me with a good positive attitude. So just really raising 3 young men that's going to actually be a value really to the disability community and their friends to really, because I think that's really one of the biggest hurdles that we have is the parents. That sometimes you're out, I'm at a Walmart, I'm somewhere, and people come up to me, and sometimes you can even hear the parents that don't talk to that person. They shy away, from talking to individuals that may look different or may have a different may have a disability. So, if those parents weren't shying away, we wouldn't have the problem that we're in today. So I think that if they would become more inclusive, and instead of you shying away, come talk to me. I'm not gonna bite you, trust me. But just come talk to me. I mean, because if you got questions, people want to know, and you're not gonna hurt my feelings. I didn't heard every question. Someone new this year. I had a couple new ones, but for the most part, I've heard all the questions that you're gonna ask me over the last 25 years. So, come talk to me. Come talk to anyone that may have any type of disability and help that person out. I mean, sometimes, you can see a person wandering. I was in college and I was wandering and I'm looking for the door and you see me wandering, but you don't help me out, but, sometimes people are like that. They don't know how to approach you. They don't know how to give that help. So just really, that's my biggest success right there is really raising 3 young men and, being around their friends, and hopefully they will continue to be advocates for the disability community.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, Birdie.
Well, as far as a success, even though the state of Indiana states that due to overwhelming conflict that I have with them, they will not reinstate my foster license, even though another LCPA person that I know of spoke to a DCS state licensing specialist and said if they did a waiver that they would reinstate, but then once they realized my name, then it was, they basically, that's clearly what they stated, due to the overwhelming conflict between myself and them, they will not license me. So I am still making an impact with other disabled people that have had experience with medical trauma. I'm still helping people because they know of my background of living with a feeding tube and with a port. I'm still able to help them. I'm still helping other foster children that are placed with friends that are going through medical trauma and helping them navigate that process. I'm advocating to get laws changed in legislature. Morgan, you're cracking me up. But yeah, so that I will tell you that I was hesitant to use my given name because with this webinar, because I knew that it was going to paint an arrow on my back. And I will tell you that I'll try to show it, but you can see who's been stalking my LinkedIn profile, regardless that I'm not currently trying to get licensed because they told me they won't license me. I'm not looking for employment, but yet they are stalking my social media. The CASA and DCS, that was something that they admitted to in our hearing, is that they were stalking my social media profile. They testified that I had posted pictures of the foster child that we had on Twitter, which I don't even have a Twitter account. They said I had posted pictures on Instagram, which was absolutely false. They didn't have to prove anything. They just had to state that. And so they can still keep coming from me, but I'm going to continue to serve the community. That's how I was raised, and that's what I'll continue doing. So
Thank you. You really have some great insight today. Our final question is about what is needed to enable a person with disability to be a parent or guardian. Let's go with Chasity.
I'm sorry, Morgan, can you repeat the question? Do you have it written down?
Sure. I think the question is, what is needed to enable people with disabilities to be parents? Is that right, Jen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for understanding, Jen.
Oh, it's fine.
So I think opportunities like this to let us know that we're not alone, because I feel really alone. And actually I have family that is not supportive of what I'm getting ready to do, and I've lost friends over it, but I really don't care because there's a hurting world out here and these kids need us. But we need more people to be understanding that when we ask for an accommodation or something, like, we're not just doing it to make life difficult on you or you have to do extra things. We're doing it so that we can foster longer, because one of the things I've learned in class is something like 70% of first-time foster parents quit after the first year, like, which I think is insane, but it's because they get burned out and we don't always get the help that we need. And for me, there was a study done on me. It takes me 4 times as much. This was done back when I was a teenager, by the way. 4 times as much energy as the next guy just to stand up. That's not walking anywhere, and that was back then. And now I'm slow as a turtle, and at some point will be completely unable to walk, but not today. So when I say that I need some extra respite care, I'm not out here going to be partying. I'm probably going to be sleeping or cleaning without somebody in my way. And so it depends on our situation, but we just need more people that are willing to stand up for us. Like Birdie's situation, there should be somebody else there helping her fight this thing, not by herself. Which I'm glad to know you now, Birdie. I want to get to know you better outside of this, by the way, because I think you could help me with some things, or at least some support. So I don't really know, because it all just depends. Everybody's situation is different. So what Ray needs, I may not need, and what I may need, Birdie may not need. So it just depends. But this organization and what you guys are doing is incredible, and I think it's a good start for anybody that's out here in the audience listening to us. Reach out to us, ask us what we need. If you know a resource, if one of us needs something, if you know a resource, please, for the love of God, tell us.
Thank you, Chasity. How about you, Birdie?
One thing that would immensely help was if people within DCS, CASAs, LCPAs would actually acknowledge their unconscious or their conscious bias against people with disabilities would be great, because although that, yes, that is DCS's policy not to discriminate, and they say that they don't, they clearly do. And just to be aware of, especially their unconscious bias of that they don't value us they don't see us as having equal rights. But my situation is that I didn't actually go into this to foster. I went into this to adopt a child from the Indiana adoption program. I just didn't know that the LCPAs actually would prefer you to just continue to foster because they get paid a daily stipend to have you as foster parents. So now that we made that clear that we wanted to adopt, I have so much bias against me for advocating for my rights as a foster parent that I can't to this day adopt from the Indiana adoption program on this side of our fight, because it's all still under DCS's umbrella. And even when you your license gets revoked and you fight and you go with an ALJ judge, that judge is actually under the DCS umbrella. So there's really no accountability. There's such a conflict with, it's like DCS is never going to be held accountable as long as they are the only ones that are overseeing everything. So for me to adopt, I would just have to do a private adoption, which my husband's employer has a benefit that would reimburse you up to $10,000 for an adoption. But you'd have to come up with that money up front, which we felt led to adopt from the system, because that's what my grandparents did. My grandparents adopted 4 younger siblings that were actually in the foster system back in the 60s. And so I just wanted to continue that legacy, and the state of Indiana has done everything they can to prevent me from doing that. So yeah, so if they would just be acknowledge that they did and do have some unconscious and conscious bias, that would be great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Ray.
What is needed for people with disabilities to parent? The biggest thing I would say is open-mindedness. We need a society that's more open-minded. People believe everything that they see on TV, which is one of the biggest propaganda tools out there. So if all you see is individuals with disabilities in positions of helplessness, that's all that they will know. So I think we need people to be more open-minded and people to understand that it can happen to you. I mean, I work with people who are blind and visually impaired. I see them at the rehab center that just lost their sight at 40, at 35. So these individuals are already parents. They know how to parent, but on the flip side of that, now they have a disability. So now people are going to look at you differently, but people just need to be more open-minded. They need to know about assistive technology that is used by individuals with various disabilities. They need to know about transportation options. I mean, the paratransit system, Uber, Lyft. They just need to be more educated, especially like hospitals, school systems, things that deal with people from all walks of life. We need to be able to educate these individuals, nurses, doctors, and talk to them about, what a person who is blind may need, what a person who is wheelchair bound may need. So, because like you said earlier, Chasity, everybody's not the same. So it's not like a cookie cutter type of situation here. People need to understand that, I need, my materials in email or, Braille if needed, things of that nature. So I think it's really just educating as many people as we can, having these webinars and seminars, and leading by example is really my final statement right there, is leading by example. So if you lead, you hold yourself to a high standard, you work with that confidence, people will start to treat you differently, because I noticed that just within my own life, before I knew about, all these advocacy programs, and then I started studying legislation and things of that nature, I didn't have that confidence that I have now. I just let people talk around me and things like that. But now that I know, that equipped me, that made me stronger, that made me a better father at the end of the day, because if I'm getting walked over, my children to get walked over. So at the end of the day, it's all about educating and having an open mind that, this could happen to you one day. Now, I don't think people realize that, because they're walking around here with these ableistic, ideologies right now. So if they understood that it could happen to you, and they understood that I have, you know, various technologies that allows me to be independent as possible, they would actually have a better insight on what we go through at the end of the day. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, all of you. We only have 5 minutes. Morgan, if there anything you want to finish up with?
This is Morgan. Do you want me to go ahead and try to get through the second half and see how far we can get in 5 minutes?
If you want to, yeah.
Okay, I'll do that. Let me share my screen really fast. And while I do that, I just want to say thank you so much to Ray and Chasity and Birdie for being willing to share their stories. I know it is probably traumatic to have to share and relive things that have been hard and difficult for you. And so I'm super thankful for your willingness to share and advocate and help educate folks on this issue. I think you all are kick-ass people, and I am happy to know you. So this slide says, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Right, I'm going to try to go quickly through these introductory slides. So this slide says legislative changes and tools. The next slide says, it's an agenda slide. It says SB 259 Indiana, which stands for Senate Bill 259 Indiana, reasonable accommodations and modifications, and tools and resources. So this next slide is titled Senate Bill 259 SB 259 Parents with Disabilities Indiana. And I will try to get through this pretty quickly, but I wanted to share a story about some legislation that passed last year in the state of Indiana, in large part due to our peers with disabilities working tirelessly over the span of 3 years to pass legislation that would protect parents with disabilities from this type of discrimination. So the history here is that Kane Brolin, who I believe is on this call, contacted his state senator, David Niezgotsky, who serves the South Bend, Mishawaka area, about this issue and asked for some draft legislation. And the legislation went through the process a couple of times. I'm going to give the disclaimer: if you work for the Indiana Department of Child Services, what I'm about to tell you is probably going to piss you off, and it should. So what the bill originally stated in its first format, I guess 2 years ago and then the next year. So it didn't make it through the first year because the lobbyists from the Department of Child Services killed the bill. It did make it through last year. But it started out a lot differently than the way it ended up. So all of this bill said, it restated federal law and said that the Department of Child Services could not discriminate against parents with disabilities. Simple. It asked for the Department of Child Services to implement disability awareness training that is led by people with disabilities. So a huge problem with a lot of the disability awareness and rights trainings that happen in our country and our state is that they're led by non-disabled folks, which is wild because that would never fly in any other marginalized communities. If you can take one thing away from what I'm saying today is please, please, please make sure our peers with disabilities are the people providing training on disability rights and advocacy. So the bill also asked for the Department of Child Services to start collecting disability identification data. And the reason behind that was because when they do intake, they're not checking off whether or not the parent has a disability or identifies as having a disability. So there's no way to gather data around parents who may be being discriminated against. And if they are, we could see trends, right? And see, well, it's actually mostly folks who are deaf and hard of hearing. So then there could be a training component implemented that really talks about ableism, how it relates to deaf and hard of hearing folks, right? The intent was to be able to pull information and then use that to help stop ongoing discrimination. It also asked for the implementation of reasonable accommodations in the same way that it does by federal law, right? So it's a really simple bill. It's just asking the Department of Child Services to engage in some disability-led disability awareness training and mostly restating federal law and then changing one little thing on some paperwork so we can get some data. So the Department of Child Services lobbied heavily against this bill. right? They met with the chair, who has a lot of power in this space. And his name is Representative Dale Devon. He also serves part of Mishawaka and South Bend areas, and continually tried to kill it. Representative Devon did eventually agree to hold a hearing for the bill, convened a meeting with multiple legislators, myself, some of our peers with disabilities, so everyone could get on the same page. And when we came out of that meeting, we had a draft bill that would restate federal law, take out the reasonable accommodation language, which was a compromise, and still ask the Department of Child Services to collect disability data information and to implement training led by people with disabilities. So we went into that committee hearing under the impression that's the bill that was going to be discussed. And at the last minute, DCS proposed their own bill that none of our peers with disabilities had seen, that basically stripped out anything positive about the bill. So this law passed, but the way that it passed, it only says, it restates federal law, says DCS can't discriminate. It says nothing about disability identification data. It says nothing about reasonable accommodations. And the training section is in there, but it doesn't say DCS will engage in disability awareness training led by people with disabilities. It says shall collaborate with people with disabilities. Well, it's been a year now, and in INSILC, the Indiana Statewide Independent Living Council, is listed specifically as an organization to collaborate with on this training, and we have not heard from them. So I am very frustrated by this situation. I think our peers were asking for simple rights, and the Department of Child Services actively came out and lobbied against this. So if you work for DCS.
Okay, thank you, Morgan. We need to wrap up now, and I'm so sorry we went over time. But thank you all for being here, and we hope to see you again. Please remember to visit our website, indisabilityjustice.org. Thank you.